Your
Mm,
first bear market, I would say, is
yeah,
always the most painful
mm,
because you haven't experienced the redemption of Bitcoin coming back yet. It just
yeah,
seems like your own insecurity takes over and you wonder, maybe I just got lucky and saw it go up and now it's coming back down and maybe I'm the fool in the card game here and maybe it's never coming back. I can't emphasize that enough. Your first bear
mm,
market is the most painful one. And I always tell people this, if you're from a modest financial background and you experience a financial gain like that, your brain just isn't wired for it.
mm,
And so there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty that surrounds the whole thing. And you start to wonder if this gain in the investment and the new money you have access to is really real. I started the project. I've been involved with it for more than 5 years now. And it's kind of special and to some degree sacred to me because it's Bitcoiners building this thing out of their interest in the concept and out
mm.
of, frankly, their love for other Bitcoiners. Because anyone in the world, as long as they can get access to these three simple components, can build a seed signer and use it to store their Bitcoin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Our guest today is one of the earliest Bitcoiners. He was around when Bitcoin was still being mined on CPUs, when Silk Road was still a thing as well, and where the world of custody was basically the Wild West. He is the creator of SeedSigner, one of the most respected and exciting open sourced, air gapped signing projects in Bitcoin. Welcome to the show, Seed.
Thanks for having me. A little bit of a disclaimer. I don't consider myself an OG or anything. I continually meet people who had Bitcoin click with them earlier than it did with me. So it is what it is.
All right, it's well noted. I'm like I guess why I mentioned this part is that whether you're an OG or not, you were into Bitcoin, or at least you discovered Bitcoin very early on, and I don't think there's many people who can claim that or who are willing to talk about it. That's why I thought it was an interesting piece of information.
Yeah, the story which we can get into is kind of I had an interesting path into Bitcoin given my professional background and how I first encountered it.
Absolutely. So that this is where I wanted to start. You've lived kind of, I don't know how many different lives in terms of your professional career. I know that you've studied literature, philosophy, management information systems. You've worked for an airline, and then you became a police officer. From then, you kind of got into forensics. So very happy to hear your thoughts about that journey.
As a side note, I've also driven a Zamboni professionally, but that's neither here nor there. But as my background relates to Bitcoin, I've told the story before, but I was a police officer for 15 years, and for 12 of those years, I worked in a digital forensic lab. So I was an examiner taking apart computers and phones and analyzing all kinds of digital media to see if they were involved in a crime or if they were not involved in a crime. And it was in either late 2012 or early 2013 that Bitcoin first came on my radar. There was another investigator at the lab working on a case, and he had a gaming computer that had come in where a local kid had gotten a pretty expensive gaming computer with two GPUs in it for Christmas or a birthday or something like that. And instead of playing nonstop Call of Duty, he was mining Bitcoin, which was definitely GPU mining was still profitable in that kind of time frame as
Yeah.
it was transitioning from CPUs to GPUs and then FPGAs and then ASICs eventually. But he was mining Bitcoin, purchasing marijuana on the Silk Road, which would be delivered to his house. And he
Mm,
was, as I said, a kid, so he's in high school, and he would take the marijuana to school and sell it in small packages to other kids, and was making a tidy little hustle with this routine. But of course, a teacher eventually found out about it and called the police, and that's how his computer eventually made its way to our forensic lab, where this other examiner was struggling with the "what is Bitcoin" question because he also had not even heard of it, wasn't familiar
mm,
with it, and was trying to figure out how how this computer was being used to generate some kind of money that could be then used to purchase uh, drugs through the internet, and so that's what sent me down the original rabbit hole of Google, and Bitcoin Talk was still pretty active at that point. Talk for people who aren't aware, there's a forum called bitcointalk.org, I believe is the URL, and that was probably ground zero for people exchanging ideas and information and technical information on projects and stuff like that at really in Bitcoin's infancy. And it was it, the Bitcoin conversation has gradually shifted to other places over time. It seemed like
Yeah.
Reddit was the center of Bitcoin for a while, and now I guess Twitter might be. But yeah, so I started on Bitcoin Talk. You know, they actually had a clever onboarding experience that pointed you towards the white paper and
Hmm.
required that you spend a certain amount of time reading the forums before you were even allowed to post there outside of the new user area. So yeah, that was my experience first trying to figure out what this thing called Bitcoin was.
So what did you find out? As you said, the Bitcoin content has changed dramatically. Okay, now there's lots of talk about Bitcoin Twitter, all of the content, the YouTube, all of these podcasts, all the books as well. It's pretty easy to get a quality content and I get a grasp of what Bitcoin is. So, what did you discover through that journey of yours as a forensics police officer?
So that's an interesting angle, and I think to some degree, Bitcoin is many things to many people. So we ourselves, I think, project onto Bitcoin
Mm,
a part of ourselves as we interpret it and try to figure out its importance in the world. But at the time, I kind of viewed it from two lenses. One was the law enforcement lens that was what are the implications of this decentralized, semi-private money system that is permissionlessly available to just about anybody anywhere in the world.
mm,
And I was conflicted about that to some degree because I did the majority of my work in crimes against children. So basically,
mm,
um, building cases against people who produce child pornography or abuse children or that sort of thing. And I had a sense that uh, I'm thankful to see that this, to my knowledge, hasn't materialized in a significant way. But the idea of child pornography being sold on the internet for Bitcoin was something I wrestled a lot
mm,
with
mm,
in the beginning, and it kind of comes down to Bitcoin's a tool. At least for me, it comes down to Bitcoin being a tool, and just like an automobile or a knife or a gun, it's
yeah,
a powerful tool that can be used for good in the world, but it also is a powerful tool can be used in the wrong hands to do um, evil.
yeah,
And so I kind of wrestled figuring out that whole dilemma in the beginning. But the other aspect of Bitcoin that a lot of other people may be more familiar with is the what's been termed as the number go up factor. So I was a young father with a big mortgage and a growing family, and I thought maybe I am possibly early to the party on this thing that could end up being worth a lot more than what it
mm.
currently is. And so that drove a lot of my early participation into Bitcoin. Um, it
So,
seems like most Bitcoin. Oh, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you here. What
Oh,
was happening with the price action for you to kind of get interested in the number go up at that time?
so in 2013, I started paying attention to Bitcoin at exactly the wrong time, which is as the price was starting to go vertical. There was
Mm,
a run up. I don't even know where it started from, but it was in like low single dollars. I believe it was in March or April of 2013. There was a run up from low single or double digits to I think about 250 or $260, which is a
wow.
huge uh, percentage-wise gain from where it had been, and there was a lot of excitement in the Bitcoin space, even though there were not a ton of exchanges or other ways to other than mining, it was still pretty
Mm,
difficult to obtain Bitcoin. But, so the price ran up in March or April to that 260-ish level, and then it kind of drifted back down, for the next few months. I remember Coinbase was actually brand new. I was probably one of the earlier customers of Coinbase, And I
Mm.
remember in the summer of 2013 buying Bitcoin for about 65 or $70 a coin on
Wow.
Coinbase as the price had drifted down. And then at the end of the year, it had this even crazier rise where, it went to a low of 65 or 70. And then in November and early December, it ran up to 1,100 or almost $1,200 in some places. And those two kind of parabolic rises really got my attention in terms of Bitcoin as an
Mm.
investable asset. Um, After that, in 2014, of course, Mt. Gox collapsed, and Bitcoin went through what seemed at the time like a very painful, bitter bear market of
Mm.
the narrative of Bitcoin being a tool for criminals, and of course, all of the drama around Mt. Gox.
Mhm.
And there was sentiment was just in the dumps for what seemed like an interminable amount of time after that. Yeah.
So how did you react to that? Because you mentioned so you were a family man with a mortgage, and you thought, okay, I'm new to the party. Let me make my quick buck. So I bet you must have enjoyed the run up. But how did you deal with this long and painful crash?
Right. So most people in the beginning don't realize that just buying Bitcoin is the simple and most cost efficient way to obtain it. And so my first thought was mining. So I'm
Mm.
somewhat technical, and uh, mining with at the very beginning of when I discovered Bitcoin, mining with GPUs was still viable. So I started mining Bitcoin in my basement. At that time, ASICs were just barely becoming available, but it was typically through this long, drawn out process where you had to pre order the ASIC and you would pay in full upfront, you know, several months, sometimes as long as 6 to 12 months before the device was actually delivered. And
Wow.
while you're waiting for this ASIC to be delivered, the difficulty and uh, the difficulty on the Bitcoin network was skyrocketing because all of the
Hmm.
additional optimized hash that was coming online. So the profitability of the miners was rapidly declining while you're waiting to get this thing you'd paid for. I did own some early ASICs, and in the long term, I'm sure I made some money on them. But I kind of discovered that at least mining Bitcoin was sort of a losing proposition. And I also went through the altcoin uh, kind of phase that a lot of Bitcoiners find themselves in. So at that
Even
time,
then,
even that, oh gosh, then it was, I mean, in terms of speculation and stuff, it was, I think it was kind of pure back then because even on Bitcoin Talk, there was an altcoin section of the
oh
forum where they had dozens, if not hundreds, of altcoins, and all throughout 2013 and 2014, it was like let 1,000 altcoins bloom. Every week there were two or three that were
wow.
launching, and they would be listed. A lot of altcoins started with a post in the Bitcoin Talk forum where they would explain how they had tweaked the
Mm.
network variables, whether it was a shorter block time or a different number of tokens being released, or what the supply distribution was going to be like, blah blah blah. And so, yeah, it was kind of the wild west of I kind of approached it with, I guess, what a kind of a venture capital mindset, to where I had these
Mm.
GPUs. If it was a mineable coin, I would mine it for a few weeks when
Okay.
it launched, when difficulty was typically low, and then I might hold on to them for a while until there was inevitably some kind of pump, and then I
Okay.
would sell them and try to buy more Bitcoin. So, yeah.
Okay.
So you would ask kind of moving forward beyond that stuff. The bear market was painful, and I had a very understanding wife who, I went to her and said, "Oh, we could buy this magic machine that will mine Bitcoin and basically create money out of thin air, but it
Mhm.
costs, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000, and we're going to have to wait 6 to 9 months until it gets here, and it could end up being a losing money." Somehow, my wife had enough trust in my assessment of the money making capability of this that she agreed to it, and so I just kind of like watched the price go up through 2013. and then continued mining and trading to some degree in 2014, but the price just kept declining and declining through 2014 and into 2015, and it was just painful. Your
Mm,
first bear market, I would say, is
yeah.
always the most painful
Mm,
because you haven't experienced the redemption of Bitcoin coming back yet. It just
yeah.
seems like your own insecurity takes over and you wonder, maybe I just got lucky and saw it go up and now it's coming back down and maybe I'm the fool in the card game here and maybe it's never coming back. I can't emphasize that enough. Your first bear
Mm.
market is the most painful one.
And on top of that, there was not enough history, whereas you could see some sort of, up, down, but the trajectory basically being up. So I can imagine how stressful that was. I want to talk about custody, right? Just like now, it's so easy to buy Bitcoin, to create an account on an exchange, custodial, centralized, decentralized, KYC, non KYC, peer to peer. There's so many options. It's so easy. Um, I'm sure custody was not like it is today. And I want to talk about the state of custody today, but how did you custody your Bitcoin that you were mining or buying back then?
Right. So first, back then, so many Bitcoin were being held in Bitcoin Core. So there wasn't this wide variety of, third-party wallets and other tools that you could use or apps that you can buy and hold Bitcoin with. Most people's journey started with Bitcoin Core, and Bitcoin Core in the beginning, um, i you can think of the program as kind of a one-stop shop for everything Bitcoin. You can
Okay.
obviously set up a new Bitcoin wallet and you can receive Bitcoin and you can spend Bitcoin. In the earliest versions of Core, there was also a menu option where you could just use your computer to start mining if you wanted to. And it was a toggle sort of thing that you could turn on and off, if you wanted to use your computer to try to mine a block of,
Mm-hmm.
uh, of Bitcoin. Um, so the earliest Bitcoin that I held was in Bitcoin Core, and Bitcoin Core uses this special file called a wallet.dat that is, um, by its nature, it's what we refer to as a hot wallet because Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
Core has to be online to be downloading
Right.
blocks and maintaining consensus with the network. So if the computer's online, that's not the best place to store a private key. They had put
Mm-hmm.
some mitigations into place. You could keep your wallet.dat encrypted and enter a password to unencrypt it when you wanted to use it, but it's still not a good idea to keep your Bitcoin private keys on a computer that's always connected to the internet. So, some other more creative kind of solutions evolved in that early period. One was a program I remember called Armory, which was essentially a piece of software that you could install in a separate computer, and that computer was intended to be offline and not
Mm.
connected to the internet. And you could essentially use that offline computer to approve transactions that you would then move using, say, a USB thumbstick or a memory card or something like that. You would
Mm-hmm.
then move back to your computer that was online where Bitcoin Core was installed. So that was Bitcoin Armory was a great concept. It's just a little cumbersome for a lot of people
Mm.
to maintain a separate computer
Yeah.
and to do a sneaker net moving transactions like that. Another great solution that uh, was brought to the market or created or whatever during that period was called BitAddress. And
Okay.
BitAddress was a website that it's still out there. BitAddress.org would allow you to create new private keys in a pretty secure way by moving your mouse around in a random pattern,
Mm.
and the randomness of your movements was part of what was used to create the private key. And then once you'd created private keys in this offline environment, you could then create the public keys that allow you to receive Bitcoin and store it. So the way I did it was in this offline environment, created a new private key and generated a bunch of separate receive addresses that I believe it was actually created a bunch of private keys that had corresponding public keys. So it was a bunch of private public
Mm-hmm.
key pairs. I printed them using an inkjet printer that was USB connected to the computer, so it again didn't require any sort of wireless network connection or anything like that. Never used that printer again, threw it away.
Mm.
Um, because the idea is you don't want these keys to touch any device that is
So
online or
so
connects to the
you
internet.
were aware, like you were your level of awareness and, if I may say, good paranoia back then was that developed.
Yeah, and it part of it was, a good part of it was my background in forensics,
Mm,
which, helped me understand some of these basic aspects of information security systems and how important it was that these private keys, which are the secrets that protect your money, how
mhm,
important it was to keep them away from devices that are connected to the internet or that communicate with the internet. So, I created all these public keys and private keys, printed them on paper, and then obviously tested this setup a number of times before I started to meaningfully moving the Bitcoin that I own to it. But then after that, you end up with these pieces of paper that
yeah,
store the secrets that protect your Bitcoin, and you have to make sure that that paper doesn't get lost or doesn't get burned, and that no one else who would know how to steal the Bitcoin gets access to that. And another note about this setup was it's still really quite secure, but there are some convenience issues also in that for any one of those public-private key pairs, um, you can't just spend from that wallet. You basically have to take all of the Bitcoin and sweep them out of that wallet because once you enter the private key into a computer where it can, um, spend the Bitcoin, that ceases to be a cold wallet. It's now a hot wallet. So that's why you have to sweep all the
mm,
Bitcoin from it to, either another hot wallet that has a more secure arrangement or back into a separate cold storage things. So what I'm getting at is there was a lot of complication even for someone like me who had a background in technology. Um, there was a lot of complexity to it, and by virtue of the complexity and the newness of everything, I think there's a lot of people who held Bitcoin during that period with varying degrees of success. There's a lot of apprehension that goes along with that experience because you always kind of wonder in the back of your mind, um, you know, has somebody gotten access to my private key? Was there some sort
mhm,
of flaw in my setup? Is the code that I'm running, has it been reviewed, or am I 100% sure I got an authentic version of it? Could there be a backdoor? There's all of this stuff going on in your mind. And all of that, I think, contributed in part to my weekend's experience in 2017 when I sold every single Bitcoin that I owned as the price was running up in 2017. I did not time the market well, but given where given the amount that I'd paid for the Bitcoin,
yeah,
uh, it was still a pretty significant appreciation. But I just had it's a combination of things. And I always tell people this: if you're from a modest financial background and you experience a financial gain like that, your brain just isn't wired for it.
mm,
And so there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty that surrounds the whole thing. And you start to wonder if this gain in the investment and the new money you have access to is really real. Um,
mm,
the other thing that contributed to my kind of weekend's experience was just the price threshold that Bitcoin was reaching in 2017. So it went on, after the parabolic run in 2013, it went on this parabolic run in 2017 from, 200 something dollars all the way up to 18 or $19,000.
mhm,
And in early 2017, as the price was rising to about 22, $2,300, the cumulative amount of Bitcoin that I owned reached the point, and this seemed like a fantasy at the time. It got to the point where we were able to pay off our mortgage and basically have a debt-free life where we didn't have, any debt. And
mm,
that was extremely appealing to me because it opened up other doors for me that included potentially leaving my career in forensics to be able to stay at home with the kids and kind of have a whole different family life for us. But anyhow, so as Bitcoin reached that whatever 22 or $2,300 threshold, I awkwardly dumped it all. Not even setting a nice sell price and letting the market rise to my price. I just dumped it like in sell orders
mm.
very clumsily that day. But it, hindsight is 2020. and the Bitcoin would have been worth a lot more, but it did create tremendous blessings in my life in terms of being able to exit a career that was becoming increasingly problematic for me by virtue
Hmm.
of the content, the type of investigations I was doing, and um, I didn't leave work until 2019. So it was another year and a half, 2 years until I left work. But I left work right before COVID. And to have the ability to be at home with the kids during that
Yeah.
period, I think was a tremendous gift. So, short story, long story, try to shorten it. For the rest of 2017, I did not want to think about Bitcoin or have anything to do with it because the price just kept going up and up, and I felt stupid for where I'd sold, even as much of a blessing as it was.
Hmm.
But then in 2018, as the price, reached that parabolic top and it sold off and sold off. In 2018 and 2019, the price got as low as I think three or $4,000. For whatever reason, I started paying attention to Bitcoin. It pulled me back in, and I started listening to the same podcasts and started lurking, on Reddit and Twitter again. And what had changed for me was this time, I was still thinking it was undervalued and that the value might go back up again. But I was also watching my country, the United States, accumulate a tremendous amount of debt
Mm.
that has only grown and grown since. And I started to wonder what kind of world I was going to be leaving my children in with the United States mismanaging the dollar so poorly and that affecting uh, anyone who holds dollars has experienced the inflation and the loss of value from that, and creeping surveillance states. That
Hmm.
dynamic as well. I think I was thinking of Bitcoin in terms of privacy and self sovereignty and its scarcity as a hedge against the dollar losing value. And so it wasn't just about number go up for me during kind of Bitcoin Act Two. It was as much about the freedom potential of Bitcoin and its usefulness in a world that is kind of scary.
Nice. So yeah, what I'm hearing, as you said right here, Bitcoin Act One was number go up. Let's make money quick. Let's get rich quick. Let's pay off our debt. And then your Act Two was like, let me protect whatever I have and not get poor slowly or quickly because of debasement and inflation. And look where we are today. So that's pretty cool. I want to share myself my Bitcoin Act 1 and 2 happened at the same time. I was living in Canada back then. That was in 2021. And I'm from Lebanon originally. So I was at the same time from afar looking at the crazy collapse of our local government printed currency that literally collapsed like Terra Luna, pretty much. Not
Mm.
overnight, but very quickly. Hyperinflation. And at the same time, Lebanese central bank and the government froze access to people's funds. If you had US dollars in your bank account, you were not able to withdraw it. It was just literally numbers on a screen. It was called lollers for lol and
Mm.
dollars. Um, and being in Canada in the developed world, I was also witnessing the inflation, government outreach. So it was kind of a tool, as you said, for sovereignty, for privacy, protection against inflation. And I love that, as you said, everybody kind of embarks on a different journey. Um, I want to ask you about custody specifically. Right today, there's so many different ways that you can custody, whether self-custody, whether collaborative, whether a third-party custody. Do you have an idea what percentage of Bitcoin users of Bitcoin UTXOs are held in cold storage?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me. I'm not an expert in the area, but I did see a random tweet from a reputable source the other day that it was a surprising number to me. I think they claim that 50 to 60%
Mm,
of, according to on-chain analytics,
yeah.
as accurate as those might or might not be, but a surprising amount of Bitcoin was still held in self-custody in one of its various flavors. But that may include Satoshi's coins or
Mm-hmm.
lost coins even, or who
Mm,
knows what they're including in that. But increasingly, unfortunately, as new ways to gain exposure to the price action of Bitcoin come into the market, unfortunately, we see at least the custody of the coins concentrating in fewer hands with vehicles
Mm,
like the ETF and then
yeah.
MicroStrategy and other um, you know treasury companies, which hopefully aren't a thing for too much longer. I think, unfortunately, the story here is that it's a diminishing proportion of coins in the Bitcoin network that are being held by their legal owners
Mm.
in self custody.
It makes me wonder, like in my circle of friends, family, I am the Bitcoin person, and my level of enthusiasm about orange pilling other people has, I don't want to say has waned, but has also evolved with the with time and everything. But I think I'm still able to showcase the use case of Bitcoin as a private sovereign money, especially for people who live in countries where there's capital controls, there's a high debasement. But I feel like as if the addressable market for Bitcoin self-custody has kind of plateaued or has almost reached, like people who Bitcoin has been in the news. I think anyone who's curious to learn about it, all the content is here. Like there's nothing really holding anyone back. The government, the US government, even if you can criticize all of these bills and acts, has adopted a very bullish, friendly stance on Bitcoin so far. The treasury companies you mentioned, the ETFs, like what else? What more do people need to realize that this is a serious asset that is not going anywhere, and that maybe you should keep at least a little bit of it in cold storage?
Right. I think the word, and when you ask what do people need to have this realization, I think unfortunately the answer is pain. People need to experience more pain before they understand the power of Bitcoin. And
Mm,
who knows what that pain looks like? Maybe it's
mm,
the company or the exchange where they're storing their Bitcoin unfortunately collapsing, or maybe it's being the victim of some sort of cyber theft
mm,
or hack, or
mm,
maybe it is uh, government crackdowns on access to Bitcoin, meaning that these third-party services that are important. I don't want to throw any shade on them, like
of course.
Coinbase or Strike or brokers for Bitcoin are an important part of the ecosystem. But most governments can pretty much flip that off within a day if they want to. Um,
Mm,
and so the Bitcoin that you might be holding on an exchange is suddenly not your Bitcoin if your government decides that there are legal complications with you owning it. Whereas if, as you alluded, if you're holding it on a hardware wallet or whatever hot wallet or whatever the mechanism you're using to hold the keys, um, yes, they can outlaw it or make it illegal. But if you need to access that value, regardless of the legal status of it, you still have the option to
mm,
to have access to your money if you're holding your own keys. And it's this convenience thing that not everyone is obviously ready for the responsibility, and there is a certain amount of self-education and work that
mm,
you have to put in. And there's this balance between convenience and security where I think the high convenience way to do things is to just leave your well, the high convenience one is just buy an ETF or buy shares of
mm,
MicroStrategy or something like that. And then maybe the less convenient way is to actually seek out a broker like Coinbase or something, where you can purchase the Bitcoin and you leave it on that platform as an IOU.
mhm,
And then a little bit less convenient is to purchase a hardware wallet, and we can talk more about it, but there's some aspect of privacy uh, and risk that come along still with the hardware wallet.
mm,
And then far on the what I would consider more secure but way less convenient, SeedSigner tries to find a good balance between the two. But admittedly, if you really want to hold your own keys and minimize the trust you're putting into third parties, you look at something like a SeedSigner, which is going to require you to build or acquire, a little piece of hardware and then learn how to use it, which for a lot of people, we lead busy lives and there's a lot
Mhm,
of things that we have to keep track of. And so, unless you have either that onus from within that tells you this is worth leaning into or figuring out, or you experience some pain or see other people experience some pain that pushes you away from the convenience side of things more towards
mm,
the trustless, uh, self-sovereign side of things. Like it's
mm,
unfortunately all of this is going to work itself out, but like the only way that a lot of people are going to discover more trustless Bitcoin self custody is through pain and chaos in the world, and
mm.
just unfortunately bad things happening.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and even sometimes, even people who experience pain will have a completely, opposite reaction, which is, "That's it, I'm done. I should have done that long ago, now I'm done." Not everybody has maybe the ability to try again or to stand up on their feet, but, let's talk about hardware wallets, and I wanna get to SeedSigner, like, as a segue. Um, I myself use a couple of hardware wallets. I am not a coder. I do not understand all of these technical things. So the mantra "don't trust, verify" does not apply in this case because I have not verified. I have trusted all of the coder, all of the eyes that audit the open source code, and how can you explain what happens in simple terms inside this very small plastic device that can control sometimes a huge amount of money
Right.
of
So, most hardware wallets have what is called a stateful architecture, which is just a fancy computer science term for meaning that they store information in a persistent manner.
Mhm,
And the centerpiece of most hardware wallets as they appear on the market is some sort of secure technology that attempts to store a private key over time and put certain access restrictions around it such that no one can remotely hack into your hardware wallet and steal your private key. Or if someone was in your house, say a burglar, or you left your hardware wallet laying out or something like that, if someone was to pick up your hardware wallet,
yeah,
there are some sort of access control restrictions that would prevent them from being able to access your private key and take your money. Usually, those come in the form of some kind of PIN code that you would need to know to be able to access the device, or some of the fancier ones may have a fingerprint
mhm,
sensor or something like that. But the cornerstone of the hardware wallet industry is um, storage of private keys over time and doing so in such a way that puts a certain amount of access restrictions around them to make them harder to steal or lose control of. Um, what I'll talk about, and you are definitely right to mention this aspect of code review and
mm,
how that relates to don't trust verify, because the great majority of people don't have the technical skills to review the code that goes into a commercial hardware wallet or into something like SeedSigner, or the code that goes into Bitcoin Core, or any of the programs or apps or devices that they use to interact with their Bitcoin. But I would point out that outside of that trust that we put in, because we can't exhaustively review all the code, there are other trust issues that are
mm,
potentially avoidable even for less technical people that come into play when using a hardware wallet. And I'll point out two or three of them. Um, One is, so that device, you're relying on that device that persistently stores a copy of your private key. You're trusting that you have received a authentic device that is as the manufacturer has built and is sent to you. We've seen on Twitter and other places, there have been documented instances of hardware wallets that have been counterfeited, either designed from scratch as counterfeit devices that are intended to look like a Trezor or something like that, or that have been modified in transit from a legitimate distributor or manufacturer on their way to the person that's going to receive it and use it. So there's this, some people refer to it as the Rolex question, the fake Rolex problem, because you
mm,
don't know necessarily if this device you've received is authentic and has the trusted functionality that you're hoping. So that's one
mhm,
aspect of trust. Another aspect of trust is just the trust that you put in the manufacturer. So every time you power that hardware wallet on, it does a self check because there's uh, a cryptographic key burned into the hardware that checks and makes sure that the software that's running on it has been signed and is
Mm,
authentic and from the manufacturer. So you're trusting that the manufacturer has maintained that master private key that's used to sign the software to provide you that authenticity assurance. You're trusting that they've maintained that private key in a responsible way and that it hasn't been stolen or leaked or something like that. Because if the private key that's used to sign the software releases is gets into the wrong hands, someone else can sign malicious software that'll run on your device just fine if they can get it into your hands to where you would install it.
so
This is,
meaning if you update your device's firmware, but somebody within the company has kind of infiltrated that master key, is that what you're saying?
right. So the worst case scenario to
Oh yeah.
describe this, and again, this is to some degree tinfoil hat stuff because
Oh,
I don't know that we've seen this happen yet, but as Bitcoin grows, I predict that eventually it will happen.
mm-hmm.
Either an insider or someone from the outside has gotten access to the private
Yeah.
key or
Mm-hmm.
keys that are used to sign the software releases, so they could create a malicious version of the firmware or software that's installed on the device. Put up a fake website or send out phishing emails, whatever they
Yeah.
need to do to get it into your hands.
Mm,
You download this malicious version, um, but it looks like a good version because they've used this secret key to sign it as having that's
mm,
the signature that the manufacturer provides is the proof that they're kind of giving the blessing to the software, that it's official. So because they've stolen the private key that confers that blessing, they can also make it seem to your device like this is blessed software that, is non-malicious. That's the nightmare scenario. There are other kind of like less, more subtle, kind of less severe sort of situations where, because they're a hardware wallet company, they're producing this device, you're trusting that they have the requisite in-house expertise that is necessary to design the device in such a way that the secure technology has been implemented correctly. There are no, big gaps in it that could be easily exploited by an attacker who has knowledge and access to your device. Um, when people buy hardware wallets, unfortunately, they also tend to go straight to the manufacturer's website and provide a lot of personal information. Um, there
email
is
address, shipping address,
right.
credit cards.
There are more secure ways to buy hardware wallets, but unfortunately, the great majority of people provide payment information. They provide an email address that's their permanent. It's not a burner or throwaway email address. They provide a shipping address that it can be sent to that is unfortunately often their home address instead of a PO
Mm,
box or some sort of other more secure shipping option. Often they'll provide their name with the purchase. And what all of that information does is give um, an attacker kind of a portfolio of tools that
yeah.
they can use to craft a very clever spear
Mm,
phishing email attack that sends you something that maybe names you by name. It's come
mm,
to an email address that you trust, and maybe it includes information about the specific device you ordered or, you know, your
yeah.
payment card information. So they can craft a very clever um, uh, sales pitch that gets you into a confused or excited mind state where you're already worried that so much money is on this device, and they
Mm,
can unfortunately trick you into doing a variety of things. One of which would be to download malicious software, as we discussed, or even something as foolish as typing your seed words into a
I
browser
know.
window or something like that.
Mm,
There's the whole, and we've there are, in terms of this information that's provided to hardware wallet companies being leaked, we unfortunately do have several records of this happening. The hardware wallet companies are incentivized to provide that information to third-party marketing firms so that they can sell you
mm,
more things. And unfortunately, the incentives are out of alignment in this way, and we've seen repeatedly customer information being accessed by hackers or stolen from company databases or this and that. So whether it's happened with Trezor, it's happened with Ledger, and there are others I'm sure if we were to look it up. I
mhm,
personally experienced the ledger hack and my information got out there, which was part of, the impetus for the creation of SeedSigner and other DIY hardware solutions. So anyway, the bottom line of what I'm getting into with a few of these different kind of angles of attack is that there is more trust that goes into using a hardware wallet than a lot of people realize. And I don't necessarily think that's always a bad thing. It's just a trade-off. And there are
Mhm.
ways to mitigate some of the trust issues, like using more private shipping information, or using a multi-sig wallet setup where you take the risk that may be associated with the technical risk that may be associated with one manufacturer, and you
Mhm.
mix in devices from other
Mm.
manufacturers or uh, DIY self custody devices in with that, so you can spread that risk. So that if one company has some sort of critical issue, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to lose your money. I
Mm.
don't want to. I don't want to spread FUD about hardware wallets. They have definite legitimate use cases. I've used them in the past. I just want to shine a little more light on the trust issues, even for less technical people that go into
Mm. Mm.
using one.
So that brings us up to SeedSigner. How is SeedSigner different? Then how does it eliminate these points of failure? And also, how what's your level of geekiness, let's say from 1 to 10, would be in order to safely use a SeedSigner?
So I wouldn't say that SeedSigner eliminates a lot of these concerns. It just slides. Uh, it puts you in a position where you're putting less trust in third parties, and
Mm-hmm.
you're assuming more responsibility for the custody of your Bitcoin onto yourself. But what SeedSigner does is, with SeedSigner, you use less specialized, more generic hardware components to, instead of buying a hardware wallet from a company and that being a device that's been designed and engineered from the beginning to be a Bitcoin
Mm-hmm.
storage device, you can build yourself with off the shelf electronic components a device that has comparable functionality, but that in many cases is not engineered to persistently store the private key. So, part of the security model with a lot of these DIY cold storage tools. And when I say DIY, I'm primarily referring to SeedSigner as well as Spectre Wallet, which was kind of the first one in the space and was the inspiration for SeedSigner, as well as there's another project called Crux. It's Krux. And there are a lot of similarities between these different projects and their approach. But the the crux of it is, to borrow that one project's name, is that you either purchase simple off the shelf components yourself or just one component, but you buy things that are not designated to necessarily be Bitcoin tools. So you
Mm-hmm.
can sidestep some of the supply chain risk because these are general purpose components that a seller wouldn't necessarily, have a belief that
Yeah.
you're buying them for a Bitcoin purpose. And then you yourself take more responsibility for the code that is loaded onto the device, either firmware that's semi-permanent or the software that you run on the device that is downloaded and burned onto a micro SD card. Um, so there's less technical complexity. You're putting less trust in the device because
Mm-hmm.
you're not necessarily trusting it to store your keys persistently, and that requires you to take a little bit more responsibility. So if the private key isn't stored persistently on this device, it has to be stored somewhere. And so you take more responsibility in terms of, am I going to write that on uh,
Yeah.
a paper card, or am I going to hammer that into metal washers or some sort of other metal backup tool? Am I using this in the context of a multi-sig setup where I have, you know, y- keeping your keys on paper may be fine if you have a 3 of 5 setup and the keys are spread apart in different areas. If one of
Mm-hmm.
those locations burns down, you're just fine.
Mm-hmm.
It would take, 3 places either burning or flooding for your paper stored keys to necessarily have a problem. But it encourages people to start to think about, do I use a passphrase to protect my private keys, or am I using a multi-sig and I feel like a passphrase isn't necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Am I storing a key, in a safe in my home, or am I storing it in a safe deposit box at a bank that I feel like I can trust? Am I storing keys with friends who have gun safes or in my grandma's attic or buried under a tree in a field I own? You know, you really have to think through. There's more onus for you to think through, how am I storing private keys? What is my security posture? What mechanisms or security tools have I put into place? And the result is, in my humble opinion, is that when you think through all of these things, especially using multisig, and whether you're using a passphrase and thinking through really carefully where you store your keys, how you store them, all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
I personally have found I have more peace of mind in my Bitcoin security posture when I'm using maybe single sig with a hardware wallet. And if you're a less technical person, there's a lot of unknowns to that setup. And a lot of people talk about this when they use a hardware wallet. That split second when you're trying to spend some Bitcoin and you're entering in your PIN code and you're clicking send in your laptop or whatever your
Mhm.
setup is, a lot of people experience anxiety because they're not 100% sure it's going to work.
Mm.
And if for some reason the hardware wallet malfunctioned or the device wouldn't turn on, a lot of people aren't comfortable that they would be able to get access to their Bitcoin again if they just had their 12-word seed phrase that is written
Mm.
down somewhere.
Mm.
And so SeedSigner forces you to interact with your private
Mm.
keys. And I think that process gives people a lot more confidence that, like, if my SeedSigners wouldn't turn on,
Yeah.
or, or got damaged or stolen or something like that, I would have a lot more confidence that I would be able to build a new one or figure out what tools I needed to just use my seed words directly to get access to my Bitcoin. Whatever that situation looks like, the process of Seed Signer forcing you to learn more and to
Mm.
interact more with your private keys, I think can give people a much higher degree of confidence in terms of how they're holding their Bitcoin.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah.
So there's this analogy that I'm sure you've heard. Like, if you can drive a car, you can self custody, even though you don't understand how everything works, but you can still manage to go from point A to point B, control the vehicle. Can we kind of say something similar? If I can do this, I can use a seed signer. What is the kind of equivalent?
Um, That's an interesting question. I like to think that just about anybody, if they really put their mind to it, and especially if
Hmm.
they have a trusted friend or a self custody coach or someone who can show them the most important aspects of it, I really think anybody can get to the point of using a seed signer. I've heard time and time again stories of people who sit down with, a grandparent or their wife or their husband in some cases, or a child. And if you sit down and explain this device and what it does, it's really not, it does some complicated elliptic curve cryptographic math, but in terms
Hmm.
of the workflow, it does some very basic things that help you understand more. So, and I like your analogy about a car, because there's all sorts of different levels of self-sovereignty with a car.
Mm.
Are you
Right.
renting a car for a weekend when you're on vacation? Or is that a car that you own, but you have to take to the dealer for them to do everything?
Mm.
Or is
Mm.
that a car that you own and you change your own oil, you could change a headlight if you needed to, you could change a tire if you needed to? Or are you the kind of person who could tear down an engine and rebuild it if there was,
Mm.
a serious mechanical issue? Or are you the kind of person who's an engineer and crazy smart and you could build the car yourself almost from scratch? There's there's a whole spectrum of
Mm.
self-sovereignty even with something like a car. Though most people can drive one, but they have varying degrees of ability to maintain or
Yeah.
repair that car themselves.
Mm.
But to get back to your original question, I think well over 80 to 90%. Seed Signer, as you kind of, I think, allude here, has this reputation of only being for technical people or people who are coders or, that kind of, or people who wear tinfoil hats around the house.
Or
Um,
people who have to have some degree of DIY capabilities of, I don't know, gluing things together, or
right.
making a puzzle.
And it's again it's this spectrum. There are
Mm.
cottage scale kind of Bitcoiners in the four corners of the world, where if you would like to buy a kit to build a seed signer or even a
Yeah.
seed signer that's already assembled, you can buy it as a kit from someone.
Mm,
And I always kind of point out that that could be, to some degree, your training wheels. Maybe you
mm,
buy a kit from someone who sells seed signers. It comes with instructions that explain to you how to put it together, how to
yeah.
load the software onto it, how to verify that you're getting authentic software to load onto it, how to operate the device. That kind of holds your hand through the process.
Mm,
But then understand that, like, there was a certain amount of trust that went into that. And if you want the fully trustless
mm,
experience, it's that much easier for you to then figure out, okay, if I order these three simple components from AliExpress or Amazon or some other online retailer, I can then build a seed signer that I've assembled myself without anyone knowing that I bought these components, and that I can have, the same kind of degree. It's all That's another aspect of this conversation, is that Bitcoin self-custody is a journey, not a destination.
yeah.
And as it's a interaction of different variables, meaning how much Bitcoin do you own? How much has it appreciated since you've owned it? Because as Bitcoin appreciates in value more, we may think differently about
Mm,
our security posture, and we also may think differently about the amount of effort we're willing
mhm.
to put into our security
Right.
posture. And then, people are we're thankfully sentient beings that have the capability to learn new things and develop skills over time. So as this sort of, as you've been involved with Bitcoin more, and maybe you've learned more about Bitcoin, maybe you've accumulated more Bitcoin, maybe the value of the Bitcoin is you've accumulated has appreciated and gone up. As all of these variables interact, people's hearts can change in terms of the amount of stuff that they're willing to learn to have a little more confidence about how they self custody their Bitcoin. I sometimes talk about it in terms of like daycare centers. When you're highly invested if you have children in where you
Mm,
leave your kids,
mm,
and no one is going to just drop off their kids one day at a daycare center
right.
without having done some degree of diligence.
Mm,
And depending on your personal situation, that diligence may be looking at Yelp reviews for the child care
mhm.
center. It may be talking to people who send their kids there. It may be going there and meeting the
Yeah.
director and looking around and seeing the environment where your kids are going to be, or finding out about their curriculum or their
Mhm.
policies about, the safety of your kids. And some people may not be able to trust other people to watch their kids, and they
Yeah,
don't take their
yeah.
kids to.
Nice. Mm,
So it's everybody's different, and it's all a part of kind of the journey, and the amount of diligence you want to do, and how much trust you want to give up to a
mhm.
third party, and everybody has to find their own place where they land. And if your place is using a hardware wallet and you're happy with that, is that is one more person who's Bitcoin or not, in an ETF or being held with a treasury company. So I think that's awesome.
I love the daycare analogy, and I love how you kind of expanded on the car driving analogy and the levels of ownership of a car, and yeah, how self sovereign you can be. I was thinking also when you were talking about that, your kind of skill, your driving skills. Obviously, some people are not very confident driving; they can't do some maneuvers, let's say, that other people can do. So yeah, it is a spectrum. I want to be mindful of your time, but I want to make sure I ask you a couple of question more. First of all, SeedSigner is an open source project. Maybe a few words on what does that mean and why it's important for you and for the project to be open source.
Seed Center is an open source software project. A lot of people, because I guess of the way that they've heard about Seed Signer and encountered it. And maybe it's because the device is so darn good, but a lot of people think
Mm,
Seed Signer is a company, or a product specifically. And just to be clear about that, there is no Seed Signer company. As I said before, there are cottage scale individual Bitcoiners who make and sell Seed Signers in different parts of the world. But Seed Signer itself is not a company, and it's not even really a product. Seed Signer at its heart is an open source software project. Now, we're designed to be run on very specific hardware. It's
Mhm.
designed to be run on a Raspberry Pi single board computer at this point with a very specific wave share module that provides the screen and the controls to interact with the device, as well as a camera. There's just three devices that at their core make up a SeedSigner. It's a Raspberry Pi, it's a camera that is used to read information into the device, and then it's a screen and some buttons that you use to interact with the device.
Mhm.
But at its heart, we're a software project, and we're a volunteer software project, which means that there's no SeedSigner Central that sells devices and takes that revenue and pays developers to create features or to fix bugs
Mm.
or this kind of stuff. So SeedSigner is this very, dare I say, pure thing in the Bitcoin ecosystem where people really are only working on it because they recognize the value of the core concept. And they're working on it partly because they see the value in the concept and they want to use one themselves and they have the skill to contribute to the code, to add new features or improve the user experience or to fix bugs. But they also do it in a selfless way, meaning that it's open source, it's developed out in the open. The code that goes into making SeedSigner can be used in, you know, uh, sibling or ancillary projects that kind of leverage our hardware or software configuration. Or the code can be used for other projects that might be related not to Bitcoin self custody specifically. But SeedSigner, it's I've been involved with the project. I started the project. I've been involved with it for more than 5 years now, and it's something that I've turned down VC money to develop as a commercial
Mhm.
for profit thing, and it's kind of special and to some degree sacred to me because it's Bitcoiners building this thing out of their interest in the concept and out
Mm.
of frankly their love for other Bitcoiners. Because anyone in the world, as long as they can get access to these three simple components, can build a seed signer and use it to store their Bitcoin. They don't need to buy anything from a Bitcoin company. They don't need to get permission
Mhm.
from anyone to download the software. They don't have to pay for the software, and we'll continue improving and updating the software with new features over time. Uh, and it's I but as I said before, you have to be willing to lean in and learn some technical concepts if you don't know them already. So that's a learning curve for some people that at whatever point they are in their Bitcoin journey, maybe they're not yet willing to take that on. But a lot of
Mhm.
people, when they pick up a seed signer, whether it's being shown to them at a conference or by a good friend who uses a seed signer themselves, it's an impressive little device, and it doesn't really look or behave like something you would expect something you built yourself to be kind of uh, to be less capable or to seem janky in
Mhm.
some way. But when you
Mhm.
use it, it's a great experience in terms of the user interface and the responsiveness of the hardware and the features that it gives people access to. So I'm in love with it. A lot of other people fall in love with it when they pick one up and use it, and we're still building and still excited for what's ahead for Seed Center.
Nice. So, three questions real quick before we let you go. What is one thing you are very happy that exists today compared to 15 years ago that makes Bitcoin custody safer?
Um, versus 15 years ago. Uh,
50, like versus when you
right,
first
right.
got into Bitcoin.
The the combination of uh, Bit39 backups and hierarchical deterministic wallets.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, like when we talked about earlier with wallet.dat and Bitcoin Core, in the beginning, your Bitcoin wallet was a collection of unrelated private and public key pairs. And to make sure you had access to your Bitcoin, you had to back up every single private key that was used to store Bitcoin in your wallet. When BIP39 and hierarchical deterministic wallets came into play, the combined mechanism allowed you to write down 12 words
Mm.
and to, in perpetuity, have access to all of your money as long as you had access to those 12 words and kept them secret. That is such a powerful tool. And for BIP39, it's credit to Slush, who was the founder of Satoshi Labs that makes Trezor, as well as other valuable Bitcoin tools, and the hierarchical deterministic. I don't know if that was Gavin Andreessen or Peter Woola or any of the earlier core developers, but those two things are just so tremendously powerful that allow someone who is a refugee from
Hmm.
maybe someone right now is escaping the horrible things that are happening in Iran, and they've either memorized 12 words or if they've written them down secretly in a book or something like that. It enables them to flee from an environment they don't want to be in
Mm.
and to hopefully get to someplace else where they can be safer and to take all or a very significant portion of their wealth with them fully from one place another in the world. It is so powerful, it's mind blowing.
Nice, nice. Um, a bit of fun Bitcoin culture. What is from these Bitcoin mantras? Which one is your favorite? Have fun staying poor. Not your keys, not your coins. We are gonna make it. TikTok next block. Stay humble and stack sats.
Even before you started listing those, what popped into my mind was not your keys, not your cheese. So
Okay.
that's the one I'd have to pick. Yeah, and that's
N-
just
no-
reflective of the number go up is amazing,
yeah.
but I was tuned in very early to the permissionlessness of Bitcoin and
Mm,
to the power that it puts into an individual's hands to truly hold their own money. Like you can, if you, I wouldn't recommend doing this, but if you memorize 12 words, you can keep your entire net worth in your head to
yeah.
the point that it is so much belongs to you, you can choose to let it die with you. And that
Yeah.
is such an
Yeah.
immensely powerful tool.
Um, and finally, I saw from your tweets, you were in Asia, Japan, and Korea, I think, for a month or two. Can you talk about the experience? What did you do there, and um, how is the Bitcoin culture over there compared to in the States or in other places of the world?
Um, for whatever reason, I find outside of not everywhere, but outside of the US, there are some places where people are just by virtue of their experiences or what they ought that the self-sovereign aspect of Bitcoin clicks with them. And they're
Mm,
further along on that spectrum of being willing to learn and or do more things to have more control over their money. Um, and I think I experienced a certain degree of that in both Japan and South Korea, which I was super blessed to be able to go and visit Bitcoiners there. South Korea is a very unique environment in terms of access to hardware wallets, as I learned. So Samsung is famously a Korean company, and
mm-hmm,
you really have a hard time going anywhere in Korea without encountering a Samsung product. And there's a certain degree of protectionism of Samsung
mm,
that is in their commercial code or the government. So basically, to sell an electronic device in South Korea, there's a relatively high bar that a device has to meet in terms of it being certified as far as being safe and not leaking dangerous radiation or
mm-hmm,
there's a um, pretty stringent commercial code. And it's not that it's just South Korea. In America, you have to have devices licensed by the FCC if they do wireless communications and stuff. But anyhow, um, it is apparently hardware wallets are difficult to get in Korea because, as a number of South Korean Bitcoiners explained to me, because of the standard for inspection and certification that they have to go through. Now, individual Koreans will order hardware wallets from other companies and other countries, but they all have to come through customs and go through the
mm,
customs process, meaning the the one-off small shipments of devices will typically be approved for import because it's not being sold on a mass market scale. But as it's coming through customs, you obviously have to declare what the device is, what it does, and
yeah,
you give up a certain
mm-hmm,
amount of privacy
mm-hmm,
in terms of their customs agents uh, by declaring it and paying the taxes and whatever importing it. But because the cost to have electronics certified for distribution is relatively high, uh, hardware wallets are not widely distributed in Japan because they would have to be imported at scale. You'd have to pay the duties on it and go through this certification process. So why am I relating this? Something like SeedSigner is
Hmm.
a really powerful thing in South Korea because it uses off-the-shelf simple components that are already approved
Available.
for import
Hmm.
and already available at low cost. So it was really beautiful to me to see the Korean community, Bitcoin community, has really embraced SeedSigner, and there are, as I've talked about before, cottage scale sellers that are building and selling them to Bitcoiners at meetups or at conferences and other places. And there are a lot of people just ordering the parts and building it themselves. But it was really neat to see how the 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 culture of our project has affect. I think there's probably more
Mm.
people in South Korea using multisig because Seed Center is more prevalently used there, and there's probably a greater people with a greater level of knowledge about self-custody there
Mm.
because they've been using Seed Center. So that aspect of the trip was really neat to see.
Yeah, I love that sometimes you create something, you launch a project, not knowing where and how it will resonate outside of whatever you were expecting. So that was a really cool story. Is there anything else you'd like to touch upon? I'll include obviously all the links, your Twitter profile, any other links regarding SeedSigner. Is there anything else that you would like to add or to share?
Yeah, no, I would just say um, if we want to have nice things in the Bitcoin ecosystem, we have to support them. And Seed
Mm,
Center is one of those things that is completely volunteer supported and community led. And if we want to have things like that, we need volunteers in a community to continue to build the project and share it with others. Seed Signer, on some degree, competes with commercial tools, things that are built by companies and sold for profit. And
mm,
so there are a lot of incentives in the podcast and conference space that maybe make it a little bit harder for Seed Signer to get the recognition that it might otherwise get in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So, if anything I've said is kind of piqued your interest, go to seedsigner.com. We have a ton of videos there, you know, that do everything from teach you how to build a seed signer to teach you to how to load the software and how to use one in a cold storage setup, or we can point you to our GitHub repo, which is kind of ground zero for contributors and people who have more technical knowledge or skill and might want to learn more about the underpinnings or contribute to the project themselves. But what I'm saying here is we're a community project. If
mm.
uh, if something I've said struck a nerve with you, dig in. Like, see if you know somebody who knows how to use a seed signer, or YOLO into the components, and maybe try
Yeah.
building one yourself. We have a super great Telegram community that is very low spam, low scam, and has a ton of helpful people into it that can help you figure out, if you're not familiar with hardware and need a little guidance on how to connect the components or load the software. It's a great, great community. So that's what I'd say is just encourage people to dig in if they feel like it's something they could get into.
That's a great ending note, and I love when people's passion unites them together. Obviously, very very nice and very beautiful, useful things can grow out of it. Thank you so much for your time today.